Here in Harare. So let me say good morning to all of you for joining this first sub-regional seminar. It's a webinar, as we know, a webinar series on agribusiness incubation and acceleration in sub-Saharan Africa. My name is Mark Kofifin. I am Agro Food Systems and Investment Specialist with the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. I am based in Harare, Zimbabwe, and I'll be your moderator for the next 2 hours. Now, this webinar is based on a study that was commissioned by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations and the African Union, and actually conducted by Agripreneurship Alliance. It is the first in a series of sub-regional webinars that we are going to have. So the SADC region is the first, if you like, and then subsequently, we're also going to have similar ones in other sub-regions on the continent, in Western Africa, in Central Africa, in East Africa, and later on in Northern Africa as well. We do have about 175 people who have registered for this webinar. So we have a broad range of stakeholders who will be involved in the discussions that we'll be having this morning. Currently, I see 62 participants, but that's not all. This is only the number of people who have joined through their computers. Those who have joined through other devices are not showing, but we have about 175 people who have registered. We have people coming from all the countries in the SADC region. We have made up of representatives from incubators, government representatives, other private sector representatives, development partners, sister UN agencies, youth development organizations, digital innovation platforms, and a host of others. So we have a rich array of participants for the next 2 hours, and I'm confident that we are going to have a very fruitful and rich discussion. Let me touch on a few housekeeping issues as we start. So please put your microphones on mute unless you are called to make a contribution. So it will be very helpful if everyone puts their microphones on mute. I would also like to point out to you that we have translation. We have translation in English, in French, and in Portuguese. So you will see the icon for interpretation on your screen. And if you click on it, you can select the appropriate language that is suitable for you. And as we go through the program, please do well to put your comments and contributions in the chat box. So you can click on chat, and if you have any comments and contributions, kindly do well to put in there. We will review it and capture those accordingly. And when we get to the point for discussions, which will come during the panel discussion, kindly raise your hand. You click on the participants button, and there is a blue icon there you can, which shows a hand. If you click on it, then I will be able to know that you want to make a contribution, and I will call you if time permits accordingly. At this point, let me quickly take you through the program for the next 2 hours. So immediately after these introductory comments from me, we will have opening remarks from our high-level personalities here. First, we have one from FAO, and then we will have a second one from the SADC Secretariat. Now, after the opening remarks, we will have a presentation from Agripreneurship Alliance, which will be based on the study. And then we will zoom into the panel discussion. We have a rich panel of 6 experts who will be sharing experiences on different dimensions of the topic. So it promises to be a very, very interesting discussion during the panel's discussions. And then after that, we will have a short session where we will hear a little bit about the United Nations Food Systems Summit, which is planned for next year. And after that, we will wrap up everything within 2 hours. So we intend to stay within our allocated time of 2 hours. Okay, so at this point, let me introduce our first speaker to give us the opening remarks. He is in the person of Dr. Patrice Talla. He is the FAO Sub-Regional Coordinator for the Southern Africa region, and also the FAO representative for Zimbabwe and Eswatini. Patrice, please give us your opening remarks.
Thank you, Mark, and good morning, colleagues. It's really a pleasure for me this morning to be here with you in this interesting, I would say, workshop and meeting. And so it's really an honor to provide some keywords, introductory remarks for the opening of this meeting. And so I want to recognize all the participants, the SADC director, Dr. Domingos, and all the participants. So today I think it's really clear that we need agripreneurs who are ready to join us in the transformation of the agriculture sector towards a more sustainable, productive, and profitable and competitive one. So we all know the role that agriculture plays in the economy of many countries in Africa, but we are also aware of the amount that many of these countries spend every year to import food, which means that there is still in a lot of place for the sector, with a lot of room for the agriculture sector, especially for the young who wants to involve in the sector. So the capacity building of the small and medium agro enterprises is particularly crucial, because these enterprises can play a key role in the transformation of the agriculture sector to ensure food security and nutrition in the countries, in our countries, but also to protect the local food culture and heritage, and to provide income and employment to many small actors along food value chains, both in the farms, but also off farms. So there are also in many ways the catalyzers of the investment and economic growth in both rural areas and around the cities. We all know the important role that the urban and peri-urban agriculture can play as providers of the food in the cities. We realized that, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, how it was important to have this urban and peri-urban agriculture in many cities, where the transportation from far from the rural areas became a real issue to provide food in the cities. So the small and medium scale enterprises in the SADC regions today face many of the same challenges as small farmers, which are, among others, challenges, the weak technical expertise and business management skills, a lack of affordable finance. We all know that is always difficult for the small entrepreneurs to access to finance. Also, expensive transport services, poor surrounding infrastructure system, and a weak collective representations, among others. Therefore, it is important to mention the role that the public policies, as well as development initiative, can play to target mostly the production sides of agri-food value chains. However, besides the need for specific policies, that can address these constraints, there is a need for systemic approaches and multi-sectoral dialogue to obtain long-term impact. At the FAO Sub-Regional Office for Southern Africa, we are committed to work with incubators and enterprise support organizations in order to support small and medium enterprises to enhance their impact on job creation and their proper development. For the past 3 years, we have been working very closely with the Sokoine University Graduate Entrepreneurs Cooperative in Tanzania, where we supported around 1,000 young inspiring entrepreneurs from different areas of Tanzania. FAO is also aiming to enhance the capacities of business development service providers, such as the National Institute for Support to Small and Medium Enterprises in Angola, the private sector, and the civil society enterprises. The FAO Rural Invest tool needs to be upscaled in order to facilitate quality service provision in the development of business plans, particularly for young entrepreneurs. Next week, we'll be launching a Making Markets Matter, which will be a 3-week virtual course with our partner MMM Inc., where about 24 small and medium enterprises will enhance their knowledge in agribusiness management and marketing. We understand that they still need to bring more examples of successful entrepreneurs. And in 2018, you will remember that a publication made by FAO on agripreneurs across Africa, Stories of Inspiration, that aim at bringing more cases of success and direct experience from fellow agripreneurs in Africa to start up growing agribusinesses and youth. We are also focusing on increasing the sharing of experience in countries of the sub-region that have been more disadvantaged to join us in the past due to language barriers. And the COVID-19 pandemic has helped us in that sense. Virtually, we are able to join more people, but also effective translation to more languages, including Portuguese. Finally, we really believe that digitalization can extend the impact we can have in the sub-region. At this stage, so I would like to extend our thanks to our partners. FAO supports vision and objective of the African Union and the Southern Africa Development Community SADC in working with governments to enable environment for agribusiness development through policies, sector strategy, public-private partnerships, and capacity building. I would also like to recognize the partnership with the Agripreneurship Alliance and many of you CEO of incubators, accelerators, former incubate, young agripreneurs, development partners, and financial institutions who have been on the journey with us on making a difference in how services can be provided. You have been available for youth and other enterprises to grow their businesses to support job creation, but also to increase competitiveness and output of the agriculture sector in the sub-region, and that aim at decreasing import of agriculture and food products, and at the same time, strengthening the self-sufficiency of our member countries in food security and food sovereignty. I welcome you to this important webinar, and I wish you all good and fruitful discussions during the next 2 hours. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you very much, Dr. Patrice Talla, for that wonderful opening remarks, which emphasizes the importance of the topic to FAO's work and also highlights the importance of the partnerships that we have with different stakeholders. Thank you very much. Now, one important partner for this event is the SADC Secretariat. And at this point, I would like to invite Mr. Duncan Samikwa, representing the Directorate of the Food, Agriculture and Natural Resources of the SADC Secretariat, to also give us some opening remarks. Duncan, please.
Thank you very much, Mark. It's a pleasure and honor for me to represent the director, Gov, who unfortunately is unable to attend. I also want to recognize Dr. Tala, the representative of FAO in the sub-region, colleagues and all partners, all protocols observed. The SADC Secretariat is pleased to participate in this important meeting. In the field of agriculture, SADC has formulated what we call the Regional Agriculture Policy since 2014, which was developed to contribute towards the attainment of common agenda to promote sustainable and equitable economic growth in the region. Now, the Regional Agriculture Policy is implemented through the Regional Agriculture Investment Plan into 5-year phases. At the moment, we are in the first 5-year phase, 2017 to 2022. And as many of you probably know, the Regional Agriculture Investment Plan was prepared in the context of the CADAP. I think people like Mark were heavily engaged, FAO was heavily engaged. And the objective is to support and accelerate the implementation of the Regional Agriculture Policy. Now, in order for the region to make sure to operationalize the Regional Agriculture Investment Plan, since last year, we've been trying and formulating to operationalize the Regional Agriculture Development Fund. The Agriculture Development Fund is a critical tool for us because it's going to be used to provide a financial instrument and it's going to be used to deploy measures and incentives to accelerate the implementation of national agriculture investment plans as well as the regional agriculture policy. The ADF, among others, the ADF, which is the Agriculture Development Fund, was structured to leverage private sector investment and financing into agriculture. And comprises several funding windows, but I'll only mention one which is relevant to this meeting, and this is the so-called value chain facility. And under that value chain facility, we've got what we call clusters, producer organizations, and agricultural industrial associations window. So using this window and using this facility, we see a lot of synergies with what we're discussing here today. And the whole purpose of this window is to promote public and private sector partnership in the development and implementation of agribusiness and agri-food chains in the SADC region. So that's on the policy side and what our intentions. Now in practice, last year in November, we partnered with the FAO and the others to identify, for example, we had a big study in the region, what we call the regional agro-processing value chains in the SADC region. The idea is that we came up with 16 critical value chains in the region in the field of agriculture, which would like support from both public and private sector. And out of those, we have 4 main ones, which we want to immediately go into. Apart from that, we are also finalizing the process of operationalizing the ADF, the Agriculture Development Fund. And we had a meeting with jointly hosted by FAO in Cape Town in November, in which we invited over 700 partners, stakeholders, including governments, banks, investors, project owners. I think many of the people in this audience attended that meeting. The roundtable meeting was aimed at facilitating engagement between the private sector and the public sector in the region. We wanted to discuss how effectively we can involve the private sector in the implementation of not only the SADC RIPE, but how we can use our instruments like the Agriculture Development Fund to catalyze and increase private investment development in a sustainable and inclusive way. So we look at this incubation work as contributing towards that goal. And by leveraging the private sector, we hope to improve participation of small-scale farmers into the value chains. We are doing this under the umbrella SADC Council and Summit have come up with a business council, and we linked the private participation. We wanted to work under that border of SADC Business Council. Now, coming to the incubation acceleration in Africa, we note that the results of the study show that incubation, private incubation and acceleration in Africa is rather a new topic, but it is growing. There's a significant increase in incubators and accelerators, which have been registered since 2010. Out of the 300 incubators that we have mapped, we note that 100 are purely agriculture focused, and nearly 50% of the incubators are in just 5 countries. This is Ghana, Kenya, South Africa, Nigeria, and Uganda. Now, from a Southern African Development Committee perspective, this worries us because out of our 16 members, we only have South Africa. It also shows that we've got a lot of work to do in the region. We also noted that there's a wide spectrum of entrepreneur support organizations. These are governments, sponsored organizations, UN agencies, which are all trying to work together to expand this sector. But also of concern to us is that there are limited incubators which are engaged in agro-processing. One of the key drivers of SADC economic growth the past 5 years is industrialization. And from the agriculture perspective, we are driving agro-processing as one of the key contributors to that. So the fact that we only have 10 out of 300 incubators that are in the agro-processing is also an area which we need to work on. The study also notes that there's very limited cross-fertilization and knowledge among incubators, but the colleagues that did the study will explain this better to us. In conclusion, from the SADC perspective, is that we see a great potential to learn from each other in the management and operating models, training, mentorships, and service offered to entrepreneurs. So that's a positive note that we're looking forward to. But also we see an opportunity of working together to improve the participation of all sectors in agriculture, including women and youth. Many of the activities in the incubation processes would be actually attractive to the youth. It's one way of attracting the youth in agriculture and one way of creating employment for the youth. So, Mr. Moderator, with those few remarks, I once again would like to share our sincere thanks for inviting us and our participation at this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Duncan, for establishing the linkages between the projects and programs, policies of SADC, and this topic on agribusiness incubation, and highlighting the potential that exists for us to work together on this to support agriculture and agribusiness development in the SADC region. Thank you very much. I see that our numbers are going up. We have 119 participants who have joined by computers now. I'm sure there are many more who have joined through other devices. So the numbers keep increasing, which is very encouraging. I would like to remind you, especially the speakers, that when it is your turn to speak, kindly turn on your video so that the participants can see your face as you speak. Okay, so at this point, I would like to invite Dr. Anne Ruling, who is the President of Agripreneurship Alliance, to give us her presentation on the topic of agribusiness incubators and accelerators in sub-Saharan Africa. Anne, please.
Thank you very much, Mark, and thank you very much, Patrice and Duncan, for those welcoming remarks. So I'm going to give just the highlights of some of the study that we've conducted, with some points particularly relevant for Southern Africa. Now, there's probably as many definitions of incubators and accelerators as there are organizations. So we really prefer to use the term entrepreneur support organizations, because this then reflects the wide spectrum of different organizations that are supporting entrepreneurs in this area. So just to give you an idea of the spectrum, and here you'll see a few examples from Southern Africa, by no means not exhaustive, but just some examples. So first of all, you have agricultural training and or agricultural research organizations. And we're very glad to have on the panel a Melody from the Mobile Agri Skills Development and Training, who will talk a little bit more about her activities. Then we have banks, we have private sector organizations. Again, delighted to have Alan Race, the founder of Race Corps, who's going to be on the panel. And Alan has really been a pioneer in this area, starting 20 years ago and built up an extremely strong organization. There are also tech hubs. They've been springing up right over Africa. And in the study, we've only included those tech hubs that have some activities within agriculture. But this is really a recent development of all the IT focused activities. We have government-sponsored organisations. I want to specifically mention the activities of CEDA, the Small Enterprise Development Agency in South Africa. Then universities, there's a whole series of universities working in this area, and we're very happy to have quite a number of these participating in this webinar today. NGOs, organisations like Technoserve, particularly active in Mozambique. Network organisations, extremely important. And we have the African Women's Innovation and Entrepreneurship Forum also participating. And then last but definitely not least, organisations founded by UN agencies like SEED, FAO UNIDO, the World Food Programme, etc. So I think this already gives you an idea of the spread of different types of organisations and some indications of the focus that they have in supporting entrepreneurs. Now, as Duncan said, 5 countries are particularly active across sub-Saharan Africa. And here I've only included organisations with their headquarters in Africa, not the international organisations in the US and Europe, etc. So we've got South Africa on the top of the list. And I think there's 2 reasons for this. First of all, there's been 2 governments in South Africa that have promoted entrepreneurship. And also the activities of CEDA, as I mentioned just previously, plus also all the initiatives around Black empowerment. And then after this, you have Kenya, Uganda, Nigeria, and Ghana on the top of the list. Now here we've included all organizations working across sectors, but with at least some activities in agribusiness. But if we look at those only dedicated on agriculture and agribusiness, the picture looks a little bit different. Uganda turns out top of the list. South Africa is still in the top 5, but lower down. But we see that some other countries in Southern Africa, like Tanzania, Malawi, Mozambique, and Zambia, come up in the ranking in terms of number of organizations. So we can see that apart from South Africa, there are other countries with a significant focus on agribusiness incubation. So I wanted to keep my presentation quite short to allow the maximum time for discussion. So I'm just going to highlight what we see as some of the gaps and opportunities and bring out some potential concrete actions. Now, as both Patrice and Duncan have mentioned, there is a big gap in terms of agri-processing and entrepreneurships. African agricultural exports are dominated by primary exports of unprocessed products, and only about 20% is processed. And this, combined with the high level of imports, gives an enormous opportunity. This lack of processing also leads to very high levels of food waste across the continent. And its value-added processing is really much needed for Africa to support future economic growth and capture more value. I'm delighted that we've got Roland de Corvée, the founder of Phil Africa Foods, on the panel, and he's going to talk a little bit more about the philosophy of Phil Africa Foods, food across Africa, grown in Africa, for Africa. And this is really extremely important because the opportunities are huge. Now, as Duncan mentioned, there's only 10 entrepreneur support organizations out of the 300 that we found that have food technology pilot processing facilities. And in Southern Africa, BICSA, the Bakery and Food Technology Incubator, is one of these. Delighted also to have Anzi on the panel to talk a little bit more about this, but there's really very few others in Southern Africa. The food science departments in many universities mostly provide theoretical training.
Hello, Anne?
Yes? Yes?
Yeah, I think there is a problem with the English translation. And so
Okay.
if that could be sorted, please.
Okay. Just what, the English translation into French or both into Portuguese?
No,
Portuguese.
I think it's fine now. And now I can hear you. For a short period, I couldn't hear you and I was getting the Portuguese translation. So please continue.
Okay. I'll get a little bit closer to the microphone and maybe speak a bit louder just to make sure. Okay, so yeah, food science departments in universities mostly provide theoretical training, and what is needed is really practical knowledge in a wide range of processing technologies. Obviously, it's very expensive to set up pilot plants. I've set up some myself. You're talking about, ticket sizes of about $2 million to set up a functioning pilot plant, plus all the maintenance and certification, etc. So, this is an issue. But what it would be easier to set up is experimental kitchens to develop innovative products for local tastes, healthy processed food using local ingredients. We're not talking about junk processed food, but really healthy products. And experimental kitchens will be much easier. The other issue is that in the global north, when a company wants to do a new production launch, whether it is a startup or even a big food company, they often manufacture their products using contract packers, which avoids making all the initial investments. But there's actually very few across the African continent, except in South Africa, where here's a few examples of that. So contract packers would really help significantly. The other area is is related to capacity building. Knowledge on agricultural value chains, the supply chain linkages, and the opportunities right across the value chain. Then the lack of food safety knowledge and labs that provide services in measuring, for example, alpha toxins, preservatives, pesticide residues, and allowing certification, which is really essential to capture export markets. And there's a few labs in South Africa that we found, and there is the African Food Safety Network, but this is an area that also needs to be developed. Now, the third area related to this is nutrition knowledge to be applied to food production and processing to produce these safe and healthy food products. And I was really delighted to see just this week that the Food and Nutrition Division of the FAO announced that a call for proposals to develop a massive open online course exactly on this subject, blended learning in nutrition and food systems, and they're looking for interested universities in sub-Saharan Africa to collaborate and to support to develop their own courses. So this is exactly the kind of thing that we need. Then the next aspect is solid agricultural training combined with business training. So really agriculture as a business. And a few examples of organizations that are really doing this. IITA, and I think we have a representative IITA Tanzania on this webinar. Very interesting programs run by the Israeli government where they take African students and from these countries in Southern Africa to work for 1 year in Israel on the high-tech Israeli farms. They have agricultural training, business training, they earn Israeli wages, and they come back to their countries with $10,000 on average to set up their business. So this is an extremely powerful program that could be really duplicated in other countries. And a few other organizations, just want to, Melody will maybe say a bit more about this, but the Mobile Agri-Skills Development and Training in South Africa have a very unique way of taking training to the local areas where the people are through this mobile truck that is completely kitted out with screens, etc. So this is a very innovative approach. The other area of capacity building is the lack of software engineers, especially in advanced coding. Some incubators had to start their own coding schools. The World Bank also has some coding programs, but it's really important that African universities develop programs in advanced coding to capture the huge opportunities of ag tech, which have only been further amplified through COVID-19. Then there's a lack of manuals and training for managing agribusiness incubators. The InfoDev manuals are extremely useful, but they date from 2011. The AIM does provide some training for incubation managers. Raise Corp has also done it in collaboration with UNDP. Impact Amplifier in South Africa have recently set up a technology-driven end-to-end digital platform, which can customize incubation and acceleration programs. Extremely interesting initiative. And there's a new online course that's running right now for incubation managers, organized by Village Capital and the African Management Institute. So some of the solutions are coming, but this is really necessary. Then there's a lack of agribusiness programs that focused on women. A couple of examples from South Africa, the African Women Innovation and Entrepreneurship Program, the Market Matters Agribusiness Training, Training Matters for South African Women Entrepreneurs. And the World Bank Personal Initiative Training developed some statistics through their psychology-based entrepreneurship program, which really focus on soft skills. Their pilot in Togo saw women's profits increase by 40% compared to men of 30%, all above the control group, showing the importance of these soft skills for women, increasing confidence that they can do it. And Tandy and Melody will talk a little bit more about this in the panel discussion. The other thing that's very important for women is access to networks, which is often more difficult than for men. So just to conclude, some of the conclusions to date and some suggested actions that we can discuss. As Duncan mentioned, there's 300 incubators across sub-Saharan Africa, 120 roughly focused on agribusiness. In Southern Africa, there's only actually 22 that are focused on agribusiness that we've located. It's relatively recent. The increase is over the last since 2010 really, 20 years behind the global north, although we can see that South Africa started earlier than many other African countries. There are some network organizations, but many of them are interacting amongst themselves, and there's a huge need and opportunity to increase the cross-fertilization between the agricultural research institutes, the private sector organization, universities, etc. So one action could be to find ways to create more fora for regular exchange. We're getting so used to webinars now, but it's an excellent way to really have an exchange and cross-fertilize. Secondly, the huge importance of government policies and actions, as we heard in the introduction, and the creation of this enabling environment to focus and to really stimulate entrepreneurship. Then to capture best practices in the program content selection process, develop practical manuals, including recent experience on what really works in the African context. To extend the training programs in incubation management. To look for mechanisms and funding to set up regional food processing pilots. I said these are expensive to set up, but can we have some facilities that are at least regional? And then the capacity building that I mentioned in terms of agricultural value chains, agri-processing, food technology. And one concrete action could be to investigate whether RU Forum, which is a network of 130 agricultural universities across Africa, whether they could play a more important role in stimulating university programs in these areas. To build on the example of the new FAO program in nutrition and food systems and the FAO program Market Matters, which as Duncan mentioned will start next week. Then in terms of programs focused on women, to gather information on the successful programs, you know, what really works specifically for women, and spread this through the incubator networks to strengthen the current approaches. Because almost every incubator say they are focusing on women, but you don't really find out what they're actually doing. So how can we really stimulate this? So I'm going to conclude there. I want to have the maximum time for the discussion. So back to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Anne, for that succinct presentation. You have highlighted key aspects of the study with a focus on the SADC region, and you have identified the different types of entrepreneur support organizations, as well as the gaps and opportunities that we find in the sub-regions. You've highlighted specifically the issues of the capacity development needs, and also what we could potentially do going forward. So I think this beautifully sets up the stage for the next phase of our discussion, which is the panel discussion. As I indicated earlier, we have 6 experts who have kindly offered to be with us this morning to share their experiences on agribusiness incubation and talk about different dimensions which relate to the topic. And now those different dimensions that we would like to explore in this session of our webinar relate to the kind of business models which for incubation which are operating, and how sustainable those business models are or can be. Then we want to look at how agribusiness incubation can be used to support agri-food processing on the continent. As we know, this is the level of agro-processing on our continent is quite low. So we want to explore the linkages between agribusiness incubation and agri-food processing, and also the extent to which that can provide opportunities for the teeming youth on the continent. Now we talk about youth, but another important stakeholder is also women. So we will bring in the dimension of gender. What specific needs are there for women to be able to make use of incubation to develop their agribusinesses. And we are in the era of COVID. COVID-19 is here with us, and it has impacts on everybody and everything. So we would like also to have the perspectives of our panelists on how COVID-19 has affected their businesses and what we can do to mitigate the challenges that are presented. And by the end of the discussion, we want to be clear about what we take from all this. What do we want to do? Concrete proposals that will take this conversation forward in the sub-region. So that is the focus of our discussion. And to do that, we have 6 experts. First, we have Alon Rice from Rice Core. And then we have Michael Sudakasa from the Global African Agribusiness and Accelerator platform. We have Roland de Covet from Phil Africa Foods. We also have Ansi Potgieter from Bixa. And we have, Bixa is, bakery and food technology. He's a bakery and food technology incubator. We have Tandy Diani from Girls Are Awesome. Girls Are Awesome, I like that name. And we do also have Melody Chiomi from Mobile Agri Skills Development and Training. So that is our distinguished panel of experts to share their experiences on this topic. Now, let me start with you, Alan. As we know, the over 120 people who are here this morning, there are some who are probably hearing about the topic of incubation and acceleration for the first time. So before I come to the substantive question that I have to you, I would like us to tell us briefly, what is agribusiness incubation? What is agribusiness acceleration? And why is it important and for whom? So briefly, can you tell us something about agribusiness incubation, acceleration, and its importance? Please, Alan.
Thank you, Mark. So first of all, I need to confess that I know very little about agriculture. The irony is I started studying a BSc agriculture and then changed to a BCom, but today I sit as I know nothing less than nothing around agriculture or agricultural incubation, even though Race Corp does some of that. So I'm not sitting here as an expert on agriculture. Rather, I'm sitting here as somebody who landed up in incubation by mistake, and have spent the last 20 years building Race Corp across South Africa, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Angola, Tanzania. And so this question around acceleration and incubation, and Anne alluded to it, there are a number, if there is many interpretations or descriptions of what it is there are organizations that do it. From my 20 years of experience, I'm just sharing my view. And my view is that acceleration is relatively new. It's probably the last 5-6 years that it started to get momentum. Acceleration programs are generally pre-revenue. They're much shorter. They're around three months. Some are 1 month up to 6 months, but on average around 3-month programs. And they prove the commercial viability of a model so that that business can get either funding from loan funding, investment funding, or even grant funding. So it's to prove a model, to prove a concept. And people are taken through a process where they are expected to provide rigor to their assumptions. So that's acceleration. The incubation is generally post-revenue and pre-profit. So I'm already trading, I'm relatively small, I'm not really making money. I could be making money, but it's ad hoc, and it's much longer programs. And on average, those programs are anywhere between 6 months and 3 years. Unfortunately, there's a lot of things that are called incubation, which are effectively co-working space where individuals come for the electricity, the air conditioning, and the Wi-Fi, and that's it. And it's called an incubator. And I've traveled across, Africa I've seen over 100 incubators across Africa, and the majority of them do not have programmatic programs that take people through a process to success. They are just spaces for collaboration and the odd talk here and there. So in the agricultural space, I would assume, this is where I'm saying I'm not an expert, I would assume that the same applies in the agricultural space. Race Corp is involved in agricultural programs in Tanzania. Now, recently we just started in Zim. We're setting up in Mozambique right now, and we do a lot of agricultural incubation. No pre-incubation or acceleration in South Africa, but we do agricultural incubation for many years in South Africa.
Okay, thank you very much for sort of giving us some insight from your experience on what constitutes acceleration programs and incubation programs. What I pick up from that is for acceleration, it tends to be for a shorter period of time for potential enterprises pre-revenue to sort of prove the concept that they have, and that then helps them to take off. And if you look at incubation, that is, as you mentioned, post-revenue, but before profits. And that tends to take a longer time compared to acceleration programs. So thank you for sharing that with us. I think it helps to clarify those issues. I mean, we know that these terminologies, they belong to a full set of, it's in a continuum, and they have different aspects. It's very difficult to categorically, this is where this one starts and stops, and this is where the other one begins. But it's important to see how they all contribute to boost agribusiness wherever they are operated. But let me come to you specifically on Race Corp. In terms of your business model, what business model do you run, and how do you see the sustainability, given the experience that you have, the sustainability of incubators in the SADC region, please?
Thanks, Mark. So I can't give you the model without you understanding where we started or how we started. So I'm going to quickly tell you how we started, because it informs the model. So it started as me as a 23-year-old who found myself on the streets in Durban, which is a city in South Africa. And I just want to say, not drugs. It wasn't drugs. I landed up getting a job at a friend of mine's retail clothing store, turned that business around. I was 23 years old, got into the newspaper because I did some promotion, and a dollar billionaire saw the article, sent a driver to pick me up, and offered to back me in my own business. I didn't believe him. Long story short, I started a business called the New York Sausage Factory in a place called Pinetowns, just outside of Durban, and it was a complete failure. And why that's an important statement is because I had a private education, I had money, I had a mentor, and I failed. So I went to this individual, I went to him quite dramatically and said to him I'd pay him back, and I'd failed, and he said, sit down. And I was going to leave, and he said, sit down. And he said to me, did I back you or did I back the business? So I said, you backed me. So he said, right now the business has failed. If you walk out that door, you have failed. What would you do differently if you did it again? And I said, I changed the menu, the venue, the pricing, etc. So he said, I'm going to back you again, but I'm not going to give you any money. I'm going to give you people. He owned a whole bunch of businesses, and he put the CEO of a marketing company, became our marketing mentor, guide. One became my finance guide, etc. And he put a team of people around me and said, go find the money yourself and set it up, and I'll support you with people. And I set up the second time, the same business, the second time around. I managed to put the thing together, and it was a success. And I sold that, got into vehicle security. And then when I was in the vehicle security business, I was the marketing director of that business, and I had a small little ad agency, and they were battling. And so I used to say to them, you know, you become intimate with your suppliers. So I said, what's wrong? No, they can't make their business work. So I worked with them over weekends and in evenings. And one Saturday at a coffee shop, they invited me to a coffee shop, and they said to me, welcome partner. And I said, what do you mean? They said, well, we've just made our first profit and we're giving you equity in our business. So I said, oh, that's great. Fantastic. And then I moved to Johannesburg, and somebody called me up and said to me, oh, I understand you turn around small advertising agencies. So I said, yeah. So they said, well, how does it work? So I said, well, if I turn you around, you give me equity in the business, because now I had a model. Like that was, I didn't come up with a model. And they said, how much? And in the previous model, there were two of them, one of me, so it was 33% each. So I said, well, you give me 33%. So that became the model. And so I then left the vehicle security business, and I just started what was to become Race Corp. And 2 years into the model, I was at a barbecue one day, and somebody said to me, what do you do? So I said, I've got all these businesses, and I take equity, and we move them into one office space, and I support them with training and mentorship and all this thing. And he said, oh, you run an incubator. And this now is 2002. So I'd never heard the term. And so I went, for me, it was about, chickens. That's what incubators were about. So in those days, there was no Google. It was Alta Vista in those days. And I download with an external modem. Some of you are old enough to remember that handshake noise. And then I come up with this document called Best Practice in Business Incubation. It was from New Zealand. It was a document out of New Zealand. And they describe an incubator, and I go, tick, 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 I'm an incubator. Now I'm an incubator. And that's how I heard about incubation. Now, why that's an important story is because there's two pieces of that relate to my sustainability. Race Corp didn't make money for 5 years and 2 months. I had to beg, borrow, and I didn't steal, but I begged, borrowed money from everyone, credit cards, friends, everything, in order to keep the business going until it kicked into sustainability. And because I never knew what an incubation model was, I never followed any model. And so I did anything in order to be profitable. If you look at Race Corp today, Race Corp is made up of 6 major divisions that contribute to our profitability. There's no one model. And in fact, to me, and I'm going to say something controversial, there's a model that runs around Africa, which is provided by an international organization, which is fundamentally flawed. It has huge dependency built into it. And to me, that is in my opinion, one of the biggest issues I see when I go across Africa, and because I now support other organizations to help other incubators, and that you see they've got this model, and as soon as I see that model, I know that thing will never work. So there's certain models that cannot work. You just logically cannot work, and they always will be unsustainable. Race Corp now is 20 years in. I've got 100, and it depends how you count it, between 130 and 170 full-time staff. We have 13 incubators. We work in urban, peri-urban, and rural contexts. We are not specialists. We do not specialize in any kind of incubation, which is part of our success. However, we do agricultural incubation. In Tanzania, we work in the honey space. We work in the fish farming space. In South Africa, seed growing, all sorts of different spaces. So we're involved in different types of incubation, and we design programs specifically for that. In the agricultural space, what we've picked up over the years is that you have to go to the farmers. I think Mars does that as well. So we go to the farmers, because the farmer, you have to be very, very aware of the seasonality and the harvesting and the different cycles of the different type. So there's no such thing as agricultural incubation. You have to understand each type of actually, whether you're working with a maize farmer or a chicken grower, it's a completely different thing. You can't put that under one type of incubation. So what we've learned now, as we're getting more and more into the agricultural space, is that the first thing we need to do is understand that particular type of agriculture inside and out. Although we as Race Corp do not provide any technical assistance at all, we only do the business side. For us, it's at the commercials that we bring to the technical. And so we partner with some technical organizations in order to ensure that there is both the technical know-how and will this business, and I call it a business, make money. And so what Anne alluded to earlier was also around agri-processing. So in agriculture, our main sort of philosophical approach, we've got two models that we use. The one is Gerber's model, and Gerber is a very sort of well-read, the E-Myth Revisited technician, manager, entrepreneur. Very often in the entrepreneurship space, people are technicians. It's about moving technicians into management role and managers into entrepreneurs. And sometimes you have to provide scaffolding around that in order to build those three layers. So that's one model. The second thing is that immediately we get into any type of agricultural type, and we look at the value chain. So although we don't specialize, we would look down and up the value chain in order to create a localized ecosystem in that space. I mean, I can speak for days on this. One last point is I don't like the word incubator. We call ourselves a prosperator. Incubation connotes weakness, illness. Our entrepreneurs are millionaires. You know, they're in our space. We've got businesses and we've got a different program also in the high scale environment where we could do 100 million Rand or sort of $10 million space right up to $50 million in terms of the size of the businesses that we're supporting. So it's about supporting businesses in terms of their growth everywhere on the continuum.
Thank you very much, Alan, for that inspiring story from Race Corp. I mean, some of the things I picked up. I mean, you talked about your business model. I mean, you're talking about one key thing is that you need time. It's not something that you're going to start immediately and then you see results. You said you kept going, and for several years you are not even making profit, but it takes time before you come into that. You have also talked about the importance of understanding the specific value chain that you are in, you know, so that then you can develop the appropriate interventions for the specific type of value chain. And in terms of sustainability of incubators, you have indicated that it is important not to become too dependent on external support. Perhaps at the beginning that is important, but over time there should be some kind of inbuilt mechanisms which ensure that what you're doing becomes sustainable. Thank you very much for that rich practical experience that you have shared. I want to bring in, I'll come back to you, Alan, but I want to bring in Michael at this point from the Global African Agribusiness Accelerator platform. So Michael, from your perspective, even before I ask the question to Michael, I noticed that Alan, he told us a bit about acceleration and also about incubation, and then he gave us a third terminology, which is the prosperation or prosperators. That is interesting. So by the time we leave here, we will be learning a lot more terminologies around this topic. Michael, yours is clear in your name. We have accelerator there, Global African Agribusiness Accelerator platform. Please tell us about the business model you operate and the kind of gaps and opportunities for agribusiness incubation or acceleration that you see in the Southern Africa region. Please.
Excellent. And thank you all for organizing what I think is a very topical discussion. I'm going to at least give a little background as Alan did, because I think it's difficult to dive right in without context. The company that GAP sits within is actually Africa Business Group. I'm a lawyer by training, economic development practitioner, and work a lot actually in the agricultural space from a strategy standpoint. And one of the areas that we work in is trying to bring stakeholders together for public-private partnerships. A few years ago, we worked very closely with an organization called Agro, the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. And specifically, we worked on their African Green Revolution Forum as program directors. In 2015, the program was focused on youth and women walking the talk, if you will. And we brought together in Nairobi a very dynamic group. Actually, we were in Zambia, a very dynamic group of young people who were involved in agriculture at the production level and at the value addition and the trade side. What struck me was that the following year,
Michael, just a minute. Johanna Impela, kindly mute your mic, please. That we're getting some feedback. We'll be grateful if you could mute your mic, please. Johanna Impela. Michael, please proceed.
Excellent. So I was saying the following year, we didn't focus on women and youth, but what struck me, and if you're involved in agriculture and particularly recognizing that smallholder farmers on the continent make up the largest community of African agriculturalists. Most of them are in their 50s.
Hello.
Bernardo, mute your mic, please.
Please let me reiterate. All of us, kindly mute your mic. We only need to hear one speaker at a time. So kindly put your microphones on mute, please. Okay, Michael, please continue.
Sure. So what I was saying is that in the work that we did in the African Green Revolution forums, it became clear that the preponderance of smallholder farmers today on the continent are in their 60s, some even older. Some doing subsistence farming, but starting to try and do farming as a business. But the gap for food security in the next decades is going to come from young people involved in agriculture. And young people really weren't that involved. And young for us is extended to age 40, with the idea that even if you started at 40, you could be involved in agriculture for another 30 years. And so GAP was developed in 2016 as a platform to bring young agripreneurs, and that's a new term to add to your lexicon, agripreneurs who were already involved in agriculture. And the thought was, I didn't want to have, our team didn't want to have to convince someone to get involved in agriculture. It will be as the African Development Bank president says, by 2030, $1 trillion economy. But we wanted to work with those who were in business, but help them grow in business, because too many we'd find would start out, they'd run into challenges, and they would leave the business and go do something else, because young people wanted to make money in their business. And so we thought about what are the key pillars that help a young person, and any really small business, but any young person, gain access to market and sustain their business. Key was access to capital. Second to that was access to technical assistance and technology. Third was access to the technology that you can use to grow your business, save time, be more efficient, be more competitive. And then the key one was access to markets. Because what we found is that young people and SMEs in general, comments have been made earlier in the conversation about the importance of value chains. Well, young agripreneurs often were not connected to any value chains in significant ways. And so GAP was designed to provide that technical assistance. Again, Africa Business Group is involved in economic development, which has included business development. What our thought was at inception was that we would, obviously the enterprises that we're working with, we didn't think would be able to pay for our services at our market rate, if you will. But we thought that there might be upstream companies in the value chain who would see that these could be potential suppliers, almost like a supplier development program. And we moved in that direction. We, to fund our program, looked to sponsors, again, corporate sponsors who, again, would use corporate social responsibility funding. And we found that that was very challenging. We did get GrowFin to support. We actually did one of our modules with FAO support. AGCO, which is involved in mechanization, was a supporter. But that point of being sustainable as a model, we recognized after some time would be unlikely. The other option, and in the South African context, and I should add that with GAP, with our modules and accelerators, I'm listening to in my head, Alan's explanation of a shorter program. Our thought was to have a 6-month program that these young people could go through, improve their bankability, if you will, help them identify market partners and expand their market access. And then they would fly, if you will. One of the things that we found that was missing was still capital for these SMEs, because there's a dearth of venture capital, dearth of impact investors on the continent. And in other places around the world, you have that financial ecosystem that's there, that's working alongside these SMEs. And so we saw, not to be using the term redundantly, gaps in our GAP model. And so we said, well, let's self-fund it. And that's where we've come to. So we thought we will continue to work. We've worked with cohorts with the African Development Bank as well, I should add, because we thought here we're now providing our model, but as a service. So we organized the boot camp for the African Young Agripreneurs Forum, which is a 3-year-old program now. We've worked with them every year. They have as their model a pitching competition. A lot of the focus is how do we take existing agripreneurs and have them pitch for capital. In our mind, there's so many other things that these young businesses need beyond just capital, that it gives them exposure. Most of the time, if you win, it's grant money. So it's an access to that type of capital. But from a sustainability of the business, the key piece that we've felt is missing and feel is missing is access to market. So you can have a demand-driven business where you've got clients. And then if you've got the clients and the contracts lined up, it becomes much easier to access the capital. But for our own sustainability, we've found working on the IF programs as a contractor, a way to do that. I think long-term, and it is interesting, we've been involved with it's an organization called YALI, which was a global accelerator learning initiative, GALI. And we found that there's more and more institutions moving in this space, but there's a need for more and more of a nexus with the capital providers for early stage enterprises. And then there's a need for policy development. In Kenya, for example, the government will set aside 30% of their procurement for women and youth-led enterprises. You don't have that in all of the countries on the continent. So you have a young person-led business that is out there competing with people who've retired from their business and gone into business, and that's challenging. So to some degree, whether it's a set-aside program of a sort or a corporate community that are looking at their corporate social investment spend by supporting these young entrepreneurs who are involved in agriculture, we need that kind of support. So I'm excited about the fact that FAO has taken an interest in this in a greater extent and think that there are other development partners who could also do that. In the South African context, our Small Enterprise Development Agency plays a big role supporting incubators and accelerators. Our thought was, as a private sector development specialist firm, we wanted to see, how do you make this work commercially? How do you position GAP at the nexus of impact investment and economic development? And you know, Alan's point about being more of a prosperator, how do we work with these young enterprises in a sustainable way? And the other pieces in terms of gaps of challenge is that a young person, and many of these young business people start their enterprises by themselves. So the context of having a team is a new one that you have to introduce, that you can't, as the entrepreneur, do everything and grow that business. So how do you get them to build teams and grow and expand? All of these pieces take time. And so, you know, the other learning that we're having is that 6 months goes very quickly. And we've had resilience and sustainability workshops with our cohort given COVID, because COVID brought a number of them to their knees because they hadn't thought about resilience in the face of this, or how do I enhance my digital presence, if you will, so I can increase my market opportunities. So there's a lot of learning from our vantage point, and that's really the position that we've taken to look at this, that for the continent, we're going to need many more domestic actors in agribusiness. And we do other projects related to shared processing facilities and packaging facilities, which you'll need. The pieces to come together to develop a continental platform, which is why we put platform in the name, we're still developing. Because the idea would be, and what we learned from our work with Agro, is that a young person from Zambia, or a young person from Kenya, and a young person from South Africa, they learned so much from each other. So rather than doing a national in isolation program, our program focuses on cohorts that are based in different countries. And we use digital technology to connect them, with the idea that they create a community amongst themselves and start thinking minimally regional about their business, because some are in countries like Malawi, which is quite small, when they could be operating in SADC. So there are a lot of different pieces, for example, that from our vantage point, one has to consider. And we're developing that, we're incubating GAP, if you will, within the work that Africa Business Group does, with the idea that ultimately we'll be able to do the kind of partnering that Alan does with his companies in terms of equity stakes. But we see so many missing pieces in the ecosystem, particularly around the funding, particularly around the market access, that we're tackling them one at a time with the different companies that are in our cohort.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Michael, for also that rich experience. I mean, you have also given us another terminology. I'm making a collection. We are at 4 now. I'll see how far we go. So we started with incubators and accelerators, and we had prosperators coming in from Alan. You have added agripreneurs, you know, which is specific to agriculture and agribusiness. And so thank you. I mean, you have identified what actually got you started. You you mentioned the issue of getting the youth into agribusiness and the difficulties they face in relation to finance, relation to technology, access to markets. So you have come in as a service provider, technical assistance provider, to try to help bridge that gap. You have indicated the importance from the public side of deliberate policy, which focuses on this segment of society. You've talked about, even from the private sector, using corporate social responsibility to also support this, specifically the role that development partners can play. So I think it's all coming together. But you also emphasize the need for time. So we are not looking at something that we just sort of get in and get out and then you get your results. So patience to get going and stay the course is important. Well, thank you very much, Michael. I'll come back to you later. But let me bring in our other panelists. So in the Anne's presentation, we noted that, and as we know, all of us, that agri-processing is...
Marco? Hello, Marco? Hello, Marco?
Hello?
Okay, Angola? The translator...
Mute your mic.
Ok. Problemas graves na tradução. O português está chegando em péssimas condições. Ouvimos a primeira apresentação em más condições. Ouvimos a segunda, agora vamos para a terceira em mais condições. Nós não estamos a cumprir com a regra de inclusão.
Ok, it appears there is a problem.
Vocês continuam com a atividade. Veja lá como é que nós podemos ver isso tecnicamente.
Hello?
Para não estarmos de fora, né?
Mark, unfortunately, the Portuguese
Faz favor.
has an internet connection problem, so there's not much we can do about this end. I'm really sorry.
Okay, Bernardino and our other...
A atividade continua, já vamos para o terceiro slide, a terceira apresentação, e nós, quer dizer, estamos de forma passiva, né? Não estamos a perceber. E então ficamos excluídos da participação.
Okay, Bernardino, I think your concern has been noted. We have been informed that there is a challenge with the interpretation in Portuguese because of internet connectivity issues.
Muito obrigado.
So as soon as that is restored, I'm sure we will have the interpretation in Portuguese as well. Apologies.
Não, já mandamos várias comunicações e não tínhamos feedback. Obrigado.
Yeah, apologies for that. But I think we will soon continue with the French and English, and I'm hoping that very soon we will get the Portuguese also back on. Let me go to Roland, please. So we were talking about the issue of agri-processing and the low levels that we have in Africa in general. And so please tell us a little bit about your philosophy at Phil Africa Foods and how you see the importance of agribusiness incubation to get young people into agri-food processing on the continent, please.
Thanks, Mark. Maybe just a couple of words. So yes, Phil Africa Foods, we are a company based in South Africa, but myself, I'm from Switzerland. We have people from all over the world, and we have 16 factories across Africa, solely dedicated to transforming locally grown crops into finished products, mostly for the African markets. Maybe a couple of words. We talked a lot about agriculture and food processing, and often I would like to compare agriculture and food processing to, the saying the chicken and the egg. Which one comes first, given that they are very much interdependent for obvious reasons? I'd like to say a couple of words. What I think is overall in Africa, the #1 issue in Africa if we take out on any political issue, is the lack of industrialization. You know? As a European, I can dare to say that the main reason why Europe, Western Europe or North America is where they are is because we went through industrial revolutions over the last 3 centuries. And the one issue which is lacking in Africa, and then I'm not going to go into politics because we all know there are many reasons why, but the number one issue in Africa for me is that we are in a trading economy. Now, South Africa is a little bit different for many reasons, but in Africa, we are in an economy of trade, not in a transforming economy. And that is really one of the number one issue which we need to, I think, focus and change. In the case of South Africa, let me maybe focus, because we're doing a lot of different products, but let me focus on my favorite one, which is cassava, manioca in Portuguese, or manioc in French. Cassava, contrary to what many people think, is actually the biggest crop grown in Africa. It's not maize, it's not sugarcane, it's certainly not wheat, of course, but it's cassava. And it's the stable food for, we estimate, about 500 million Africans on a daily basis. However, cassava is hardly industrialized. So it's consumed, but it's basically, you know, done in your backyards or by other people in a very small scale. So this is why we believe that most African countries importing starch from all the way North America or Europe, we have in Africa lots of homegrown cassava came from South America, but let's say 500 years ago, it has become very common in Africa. So how to basically take what already exists in Africa and transform it into finished product. And in this case, we have 3 factories, 2 in Mozambique, 1 in Ivory Coast, transforming homegrown cassava. And we all know there's no such thing as a commercial farm cassava. By definition, it's a small farmer's crop. And then transforming it either into a cake, which we sell to a beer company, or with flour, which we're selling to either the meat industry or any kind of food industry, using it as a local ingredient and therefore avoiding importing it. The only issue, and then moving a little bit into you know, how to advise people coming into this industry, I think we have, in this case, you have a requirement for a lot of funds and a lot of time. And I think only really companies with given you know, shareholders and with a lot of funds, that's possible. So we'll come back, maybe my advisors, for cases where people are much more limited in their means and what should they do. A couple of words regarding, we talked also quite a bit about food security in Africa. And indeed, this huge gap between Africa exporting raw materials, while at the same time importing a lot of finished products. I think we need to be careful. I think we need to highlight that these are indeed massive issues, but these are 2 very distinct issues. The exports, which I think is an issue in Africa because we export them unprocessed, but these are products which have very little consumption in Africa. If we look at West Africa, they export mainly cocoa and coffee, etc., while in Eastern Africa, there's a lot of nuts. While the local African consumption, these are really products which are very expensive for a niche type of population. So there's not a direct link always between import and export. But if we tackle one issue at a time, for exports, I'd like to highlight, and in West Africa, what the Ivory Coast government has started doing for a few years, and a few governments are copying, which I find very positive for Africans, is the fact of taxing unprocessed exports. So in the case of Ivory Coast, they have quotas, And basically, the more unprocessed you export, the more tax you pay. I.e., if you export, for example, finished chocolate, you'll pay 0 export tax. If you export just the bean, you'll pay X. And if you pay, semi-finished, then you pay something in the middle. So I think one of the positive things, because at the end of the day, big companies, frankly, only react to the bottom line and how much it costs them. And I don't think this is in contradiction to any kind of, profit-driven capitalist markets, but Africans need to fight to basically push, incentivize, and sometimes force companies to process more their own products in country than to export. Regarding imports, and this is maybe my advice, and I won't be too long so we can have some questions. I think this is interesting, is I would be careful for people who want to start a food business in Africa to be careful of 2 things. The number one is the supply of your raw material. So just like I said, yes, processing is key for the future of Africa's food independence and food security. However, if you don't have an organized supply, that's the issue. So to build a factory, it's one thing, but the biggest issue we have in Africa is once you build your factory, how can you sustainably basically supply your factory? And very simple example, as we speak today, our factory in southern Mozambique is struggling to get enough cassava. Why? Because we are at the end of the dry season, and the floor is so hard that the farmers are really struggling to basically get the root out, and they are waiting for the raining season, which hopefully will come in the next 2-3 weeks, and then it will be easier. But your customers in South Africa who want their cassava flour, they don't really care if it's easy or not easy to get your root out of the floor in Mozambique or wherever. So how to guarantee, how to control, doesn't mean to own, but how to control your supply of raw materials. So when you set up anything, always think of your supply of your raw material. The second issue is complexity. I think I'm not saying, this is not a statement on quality or comparing Europe and Africa, but I think when you set up any kind of food processing business in Africa, and again, South Africa is an exception, is do not think that you should automatically go from 0 to a very complex product, meaning start with simple steps. Example, if you are in dairy, which is rather underdeveloped in Africa, do not think that you can compete with Nestle and doing milk powder, or you can do UHT milk. Just start with simple, basic, pasteurization. So you have a very simple installation, costs you a few $1,000s, and a very basic packaging, and then you can start like this. So do not think, oh, because Europe or America have it, we should also have it. Start with something step by step and slowly increase the complexity of your operation. And maybe lastly, we were talking about COVID. I think COVID for Africa, and it may sound a little bit strange to say that, but is an opportunity. At least in our case, it has been an opportunity. What are the 2 main impacts in the food industry of COVID? Number one is a much bigger drive for local sourcing of product versus imports. Example, we are again producing this cassava flour in Mozambique. The whole South African food industry were importing 100% of the cassava flour from Thailand, which is the biggest market of exporting cassava flour. However, with COVID-19, A, some of their factories shut down. B, this is 7,000 miles away. C, the port of Durban was partly choked. So when you have an alternative supplier, which is 24 hours drive away from you in southern Mozambique, then suddenly we cannot cope with the demand, because the manufacturers cannot sustain to have just one supplier. They need two, and they need a much simple supply, which is a neighboring country. And the second is the risk. Most of these companies now have been in the past working with very lean supply chain. We want to maximize the working capital and have basically your minimum stock and etc. And because of COVID, people are rethinking completely the supply chain and need to have faster supply, closer supply, more local supply. And I think this is good in general for local manufacturers in Africa, and with time will put more pressure on imports.
Okay, Roland, thank you very much. This is indeed very useful. I mean, you set up the big picture so well in terms of the low levels of industrialization across Africa. That is very true. And on the issue of how the import-export imbalance also could affect food security. I mean, I like the experiences that you shared with countries which are trying to address the question of exporting raw materials, trying to discourage it, and promoting value addition in-house or domestically before export. And also the key issues that you highlight on the raw material supply for domestic processing enterprises, making sure that that exists, and also the quality dimension that you brought in. This is very useful. And so these are areas that those who want to get into agri-processing through incubation should focus on, so that they can make it in the long run. Thank you also for touching on the question of COVID. We will come to that later and look at it into a bit more detail. But the points you raised there are key, which I will come back to later. Thank you. Let me bring in Ansi Podgita. In Anne's presentation, it came out quite clearly that you know, we do not have that many agri-processing pilot facilities on the continent which could provide support to young people who want to, you know, get into agri-processing. So you have a facility, BIGSA. So I would be interested in finding out, why do you think the current situation is? What accounts for what we see now in terms of the very low number of pilot agri-process facilities for those who want to get into agri-processing in terms of product development and so on? And what can we do? What can we do to sort of have more? And what would be your advice to those who want to support the development of agri-processing pilot facilities in the Southern Africa region? Ansi, please. Do we have Ansi?
Sorry.
Hello. Okay, please go ahead.
Ask the question again.
Hello.
Sorry, I was temporarily out. Can you ask the question again?
Is that Ansi, please?
No.
Okay, so it looks like we don't have Ansi. So let me go to Thandi. Thandi, we so listening to the discussion. I mean, hello. Can you hear me? Hello.
Hi, Mark.
Can you hear me? Okay, great, Thandi. I'm getting some feedback, so I was not too sure whether you could hear me. So we want to bring in the gender dimension. Michael talked about the youth and how they could exist in terms of finance, technology, markets, and so on. We also know that when it comes to women, there are certain specific needs which may be different from the challenges that men face. So I would be, or we would be interested to learn from you what you think those needs are and how we could address them to encourage women also to use the opportunities that agribusiness incubation offers in this context. Please.
Thank you so much, Mark. Hi, everyone. Are you still alive out there? My name is Tandy Diani. I head up strategic partnerships at the community and impact agency called Girls Are Awesome. We work very broadly with amplifying and elevating female voices, getting more women representation into leadership positions in media, tech, entrepreneurship, the arts, music, everything. I'm also the former CEO of Impact Hub Johannesburg, where we work with supporting social entrepreneurs. So not only in agriculture, but broadly around all sectors. Yeah, well, first of all, I think in a perfect world, I don't really think that women need anything else in particular than men to become an entrepreneur or an agripreneur. But that is if we lived in a world that provides equal opportunities for all genders. And unfortunately, we don't. And I think it starts earlier than we really want to realize. And it's much about how we talk and portray women. And you know, and an example, I think we don't really see a lot of women in farming or in the agricultural space, kind of in the driver's seat of the tractor, so to speak. We don't see them with the big fat boss sign around, you know, across the chest. We mostly see women, you know, selling tomatoes by the side of the road. That's kind of the narrative that we build. And I think also with the report that came out that women are great in the agricultural space. They're great in creating food security. They're great at collaborating and including their stakeholders. But we also need to be much better at showcasing them. Research say that if you can mirror yourself, you know, in your own race and gender, for example, in a role model, you're much more likely to choose kind of the path that they have taken. So for me, it's very much about normalizing women in different sectors, you know, more broadly and early on. But I think as accelerators and incubators, we don't have the possibility to influence everything with these kind of early interventions as portraying role models. But one thing that we do influence as incubators is that we are gatekeepers. And one of the most critical aspects of getting more women representation, of becoming a leader of any kind in business, in corporate life, in your personal life, is access. And social mobility is super low for women, and especially for African women. And we need to kind of get access to those crucial networks, those closed societies, and that special opportunity. And access is more or less kind of a notion of inclusion. So we might, like Michael said, that we might have laws or programs of funding that are specifically targeted for women. But is it in a culture? Is the culture around it a way that women can actually access it? And in that, I would say, is our environments hostile to women? And being gatekeepers, like as incubators are, I think we have a huge role in creating that access. And there's a few things, I just want to name a few things that everybody can go out and do today without it costing anything. And from personal experience, I know it also works. And one thing is that we can always make sure that to be diverse in all aspects of what we do, we can use kind of 50-50 men and women, so everybody can look, you know, see themselves into whatever we put out there. I think it's also about daring to focus on women more outspokenly. That meaning designing and using imagery in our communication where there's women, also speaking in a language that women relates to. And it's not really that radical, but many people don't do that. And actually one point, I don't want to point fingers, but the design of the poster for today actually feeds right into that conversation with only men being in the picture. There's also a point of timing. timing our interventions so they're inclusive to the fact that women are often the primary caretakers of our families or their families. So if we put all our efforts and all our, interventions around dinner time, we know that women just have other things to do, basically. It's also about using women facilitators, so women can maybe more relate to the people that are talking to them. And there's also a huge kind of, especially in South Africa, I think there's a huge aspects of security. I think it's in the space that we offer for programming. It has to be a safe environment where women feel secure in terms of transport, timing, lighting, location, and all that stuff. And in that same kind of realm, there's also kind of a way that we can create safe spaces where women can openly talk about issues that are relevant for them, whether it be sexism, power abuse from men, etc. And another really important thing that I think we can also just go out and do is taking a more holistic approach to when we offer programming, taking the whole human being into that learning experience, building personal strength and resilience, while we also capacity build with normal kind of business tools that are relevant for whatever sector or ecosystems that we're trying to build. And yeah, mentorship is also a very kind of easy access that can open doors for women to get new kind of possibility, which is super crucial. And I think also stop putting this competition element into entrepreneurship. We all do these pitch competitions. You can pitch for funding, and I would rather see that we go into dialogues with the innovators instead. The female ethos is very much about collaboration rather than competition, and women tend to shy away from that element as well. Yeah, I just wanted to keep it short. I'm super mindful of time. We're behind schedule.
Thank you. I appreciate your conciseness, but you use the time to really give us very practical, simple but practical things which can be done to address the issues that women face, which prevent women to realize their full potential in this context. I think you highlight some key things. For example, simple things like using women facilitators. That alone is important. But the others, such as targeted financing mechanisms, women-focused entrepreneurship centers, providing a safe environment for them within which to operate. I think those are really useful points that you shared there. Let me bring in a Melody to add to where you left off, Melody from Mobile Agri Skills Development and Training. Please, what additional points can you add to what Thandi has shared with us in terms of assisting women to unlock their potentials in agribusiness? Please.
Good morning, everyone. From what I have learned, I think in this incubation space, I have
Hello. It appears we have a challenge with Melody's connection. Okay, so as she tries to get that sorted, let me see whether I can get Ansi back. Ansi, are you connected now, please? Hello.
She's coming up.
They're in South Africa, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. It looks like I cannot get Ansi as well. All right. So, well, let us continue the discussion. Roland, for example, brought in the critical issue of COVID-19 and the impacts that it is having. I mean, he mentioned the fact that COVID-19 has made the local sourcing of raw materials very, very important. And also it has introduced a number of risks in the supply chain, which has which calls for a rethinking of the supply chain. So people are looking at how quickly they can have access to raw materials for processing, and things like that. That directly feeds into local sourcing with respect to the location of those processing business. Let me throw this question to all of you to briefly share with us, in addition to the points that Roland has made, what additional issues are brought on board in the context of COVID-19. And then you may also, as we try to conclude the discussions, you may add what we can do to facilitate cross-fertilization of ideas, exchange among incubators in the Southern Africa region. That is one. And secondly, what are the concrete proposals that you have that going forward we need to address in order to boost incubation in the Southern Africa region? So what are the additional issues brought on by COVID-19? How can we address them? And how can we facilitate exchange, and what concrete proposals we need to take on board going forward? So let me open it. Please indicate whoever is ready to speak from the three of you who have not spoken on the COVID. So I'm looking at Alan, I'm looking at Michael, and then I'm looking at you, Tandy. Please. In no particular order.
Well, I'll just
yeah, Michael, please.
A few words about the 3 points that you mentioned. On the COVID side, I think for agripreneurs, but obviously probably for all businesses globally, having a digital presence and having for someone in the business of food, having the ability to market your products online, having thought through even logistics and supply chain issues using online tools is something that companies are going to need help with. I think going into the future. I think the point that was mentioned about the idea to have local supply chains, creating market, I think that's going to be key. But I think also in terms of recommendations, we need the support to create the markets. The food business, which I like to call it combining agriculture and agribusiness in South Africa and in Southern Africa, is quite competitive. And so you have multi-million-dollar companies in South Africa listed on the stock exchange, et cetera, that doesn't create a lot of space for SMEs to penetrate. So whether we have policy interventions that create buying opportunities, or we bring corporates together who agree that they will purchase a certain amount of the produce and the value-added products that are produced by enterprises that for food security reasons we want to grow, we will need that. There's a need, I think, for, again, development partners to play a role to support those who are in the enterprise development space. It's not, I think, something that is long-term sustainable, but it's like a smart subsidy, because the potential is there to take a stake in that business, to grow that business, to get investors into that business. But I think all of us have pointed out it's not a quick fix. And particularly with COVID, it is going to be slower than had we not had COVID. So for the next 3 to 5 years, there'll be a need to support the supporters. But the idea, and I agree with the exchange concept as one, whether it's an association or a digital platform for good practice, more writings. I think the involvement of not just RU Forum, but more academic institutions into the space so that we can learn about what is good practice and what to avoid. Those who are down this path are also entrepreneurs, but it's very much, as Alan mentioned, you are being self-trained, and maybe you'll find something that was written in Australia or maybe in the US, but then fixing that into the local environment, because the continent is different and each country on the continent is different, takes a whole nother set of skill sets. So having that dialogue, I think, will be quite helpful. I'll stop there, but those are some initial.
Thank you, Michael, very much. I like the phrase "supports the supporters" to get more done as a concrete way of going.
Alô, Mike. Eu queria apresentar uma questão ao Alon. Alô, Angola queria apresentar uma questão ao Alon.
Yes, I will soon come to. I'll open it for questions in a minute. So Bernardino, please hold on for a second, and then Okay, so Michael, thank you. And you also added the question of online tools in the context of COVID to address some of the challenges that are posed. Let me see, is there anyone out there still having some points to make on the question of the COVID impact? Perhaps we can focus more on how to facilitate the exchange and also the concrete proposals
Precisamente isto, era sobre o impacto 19, mas Mark, uma questão para o Alon.
Alan, yes, please,
Mark, I can add something to that. From our point of view, I think you need to look at the COVID story from the incubator, prosperator, accelerator point of view, what's happened there, and the second is from the entrepreneur point of view. From the let's call it the incubator or prosperator, from our perspective, it was very much obviously going digital, and our mentorship, what we call guiding, went digital, but we were already digital beforehand, so it was easy for us. Our learning went digital, so we had live learning. Our bookkeeping went digital, everything went digital. So, but the issue with digital is that then from the entrepreneur's point of view, there's data costs. So the issue then was two things around data, the cost of data then, if you want to engage, is data. And the second thing was the networks, was the connectivity in the areas that they were operating. So what we did with issues with both data costs and connectivity is we worked with local community centers, churches, etc. And then because of COVID, we obviously had the distancing protocols in place, but then we would basically create a quick classroom environment in other local infrastructure. So we had to build other new relationships in order to deliver where we weren't delivering. So that's just a point there. The second thing from the entrepreneur's point of view, very much the big focus was on two things, or three things actually. The first was what we built new product sets in order to I hate the word pivot because it's one of those other words that's used far too often, but to help them properly pivot and understand what is the new who, the new what, the new how, the new where, and redesign their businesses. So our whole emphasis was in redesigning their businesses. That was from an input point of view. And the second thing around that is that from a psychological point of view, our big work was done to get their mindset to see COVID as an opportunity and not as a disaster. So if their mindset was this is an opportunity, then they would be looking for the opportunity. If they were seeing it as a disaster, they would become defensive and shrink. So a big part of our work during COVID time was psychological more than anything. And the last point is we have an individual called a supply development manager. And those supply development managers worked overtime in trying to recalibrate supply chain, find new clients, and get our entrepreneurs into new clients during that time. So it was about broadening the basically the client base. That's my contribution.
Thank you very much. So the issue of using online digital technologies to sort of overcome some of the challenges brought on by COVID, you have emphasized that, and the measures you're taking to address issues of data cost and connectivity issues. I think we've even experienced some few challenges with connectivity today. And so it's important that we are able to sort of see how these can be addressed. Yes, please.
You know, most often when we're discussing these issues, we focus on production. But we need also to look.
Who is speaking, please?
I'm Joseph Chavula from CDH Investment Bank in Malawi.
Okay,
Can you hear me?
Intervention.
Yeah, it's just a quick one. As we look at production and processing in agribusiness, during the time of COVID, we must be mindful that the other bottleneck we have is logistics and supply chain. You know,
okay.
In terms of logistics, we just get things from South Africa, from ShopRite, etc. But there must be a package whereby something should be supporting the logistics and supply chain, because much as we can produce, we can have this in place, but if the markets, foreign markets, we need to also have special intervention, look at logistics and supply chain.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Joseph from CDH Investment, for emphasizing the need to look at logistics and supply chain in the context of COVID. Thank you. I think there's also a bit of problems with your connection. So, but I got the main point that I got the main point that you wanted to make. So thank you very much. Yeah. So at this point, we have actually just gone past our 2 hours. So I will create your indulgence to stay a little longer. And at this point, let me open the discussion to take a couple of comments and questions from our participants. So please, if you have a question, raise your hand, and then let me then call you to make the contribution.
We have Bernardo Neto who had raised his hand earlier on.
Yeah, thank you, Anne. Yeah, Bernardo, is it Bernardo or Bernardino? You wanted to make a point.
Bernardino, Angola.
Bernardino, thank you. Please go ahead.
Ok. Bernardino, Ministério da Economia, Angola. O Alon fala precisamente da farinha de mandioca, onde a Irlanda é o maior fornecedor. E quero trazer esta experiência aqui para a zona da SADC. A multinacional comercial da África do Sul, a ShopRite, vem a todos os países da região. Mas quando volta, vem abastecer as lojas que estão nos nossos países, e quando volta, os caminhões voltam vazios. E então, o exemplo que o aluno estava a trazer da farinha de mandioca, Angola é autossuficiente na produção da mandioca e nos seus derivados. A grande questão que se põe é, nós não podemos exportar a mandioca ou a farinha de mandioca e demais derivados da mandioca, porque estamos com limitações em duas situações. A primeira, laboratório para controle e certificação de qualidade. O segundo aspecto, medidas sanitárias e fitossanitárias. Este limite de Angola, creio que é também dos demais países africanos. Qual é a experiência do Alon para podermos ultrapassar estes limites que o nosso mercado tem, em termos de produção? Muito obrigado. Era apenas isto. Está captada a mensagem? Alô? Percebeu-se?
Sorry, Mark. Bernardino is done. He's asking if it was understood.
Ok, muito obrigado, muito obrigado.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I struggled to get the full question, but I think what I got, if it was, I got it correctly, it was a question directed to Alan, and it relates to Angola working in the cassava value chain and what they can do to export products from the cassava value chain to other countries in the context of certain challenges such as a lack of facilities for certification and quality assurance. And also there was something about licensing, which I didn't fully get. I'm not too sure whether, Alan, you got it and you have a response to that, please.
I think Mark, it's maybe more a question for Roland, actually. Yes, maybe Roland could help.
For Roland, okay, yes. Right. So Alan, sure. Okay, so Alan, you are left off the hook, and I will take my hook to Roland, please. Roland, did you get the question, please? Hello? Hello, Roland? Okay, so I'm not sure whether Roland is still connected, but the question is noted. Let me take another contribution or question.
Mohammed, name it, who has also raised his hand.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yes,
thank
Mohammed, you. Please go ahead.
Mark, good to see you again. I want to share some of the hypotheses that we usually relate to that shapes our thinking when it comes to incubation with the colleagues who work on it on the ground to get their feedback. Number one, on the model itself, our thinking is that the model worked elsewhere because these companies have access to two things, customers and market, which may not be readily available in Africa. Do we need to change, to use the word pivot, again, the model to suit Africa, and what needs to be done, and what sort of support do you need from FAO and other UN organizations? The second thing is about the main bottlenecks that these companies face. So when you look at surveys, usually the first thing that entrepreneurs complain about is access to finance. But when you look at what experts say in the literature is that the biggest bottleneck is usually the training materials or the courses, because without it, you cannot identify suitable markets or have a bankable business plan. So what do you think about that? And I'm interested to hear about the model that Race Corp developed with UNDP. And if there are any gaps that we can fill, because that's something that we're working on right now. The last thing, the story of Mr. Reyes is really fascinating. The 23-year-old Alan, I think it touches on many of the entrepreneurship myths, if you may. And I would love to document it and then share with other colleagues who work on training. The last event that I went to before COVID was a training by a sister organization, and there was over 100 entrepreneurs, I think. And the trainer was trying to motivate them using examples from Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg. And I really think that we need to develop our own sort of examples. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Mohammed. I think most of the questions were directed at Alan. I mean, Mohammed is interested in more details about your story, as you told, as a 23-year-old entrepreneur, and the difficulties and challenges you overcame to become successful. He also mentioned specifically the model that you have developed with UNDP. And I think linked to that, you was asking the question about what model really suits Africa. So yeah, would you like to share a bit more on that, please?
Okay, thank you for the question. So first of all, I wouldn't call myself successful. I think I call myself succeeding. I don't think you ever are successful. I think you're always in the process of succeeding. So right. Let me correct that. You know, from my perspective, just talking about market access, 100% correct. But for me, one of the things that the issue, I mean, I can speak for an hour on this particular issue. The issue now is that this concept of entrepreneurship, I have to start at the base. The concept of entrepreneurship is where the problem starts. If you look at what they call the psychological typology of an entrepreneur, there's no such thing as an entrepreneur. They're tall, they're short, they're black, they're white, they come from rich backgrounds, poor backgrounds, they're extroverts, introverts, etc. So you can read all these books, and then at the end of it, it comes and says there's no such thing as an entrepreneur. There's only a higher probability of these characteristics equaling an entrepreneur. Then you add the second layer to that, is that there are different types of entrepreneurs. There's survivalists, lifestyleists, and growth entrepreneurs. When we're talking about entrepreneurship, what are we talking about? It comes back to the accelerator incubator debate. What are we talking about? So in these programs, what I'm seeing is a big issue is that we've got this one big label called business development organization, or entrepreneurial support organizations, but it is somebody who's never thought of entrepreneurship, to somebody who's a lifestyle entrepreneur, somebody who's a survivalist, somebody who's a lifestyle. It's all different. So your interventions have to be different. Now, coming back to the model, what you have to understand is in the context that you're in, you first have to identify the type of entrepreneur that you are dealing with. And then you create I mentioned it earlier, the scaffolding around the gap in that ecosystem. And then slowly, once again, the word patience is important. Slowly you build out the other capabilities. So in the Gerber model, he talks about technician, manager, entrepreneur. Most of the entrepreneurs that we're dealing with are not opportunity, they are survivalist entrepreneurs. They need to do entrepreneurship to survive. If they were given a choice, the litmus test here is offer them 3 or 4 times or 5 times their salary, and they will move across and take or what they're earning. They'll move across to work to become an employee. Whereas let's call it the true essence of the entrepreneur is that they wouldn't move across. So now, which entrepreneur are we talking about? Now you have to create the gap of these entrepreneurs who are growth entrepreneurs, who have gone and built something, might not have the skills to manage. So now you have to separate them out for not doing to manage. The ones that are managing might not be opportunity seekers, which is finding the markets. So coming back to answer the question, I know it's a long route there. You then have to create in the modeling, you have to create the person who is finding the markets initially. And while that is happening, you're starting to effectively build up the person from technician to manager to entrepreneur. So there's the scaffolding that needs to take place in there. In terms of the UN model, once again, I don't want to go into too much detail now, but
yes, yes.
But we're getting entrepreneurs. We worked on pre-incubation, so the acceleration program with them, and with matching them with financiers, commercial finance, to make sure that there's commercial, but there's a combination of commercial and grant financing. But what we're trying to ensure is RaiseCorp has got an incredible selection process. 1 in 100 people who apply to RaiseCorp, we get 50 to 100 applications a day. 1 in 5 meet our criteria, 1 in 20 gets through our selection process. We look for what we call blue heart. So when we worked with UNDP, what we said to them, I don't care about your thousands of people who are applying. I'm looking for people, coming back to my question around entrepreneur, who are growth entrepreneurs, who have blue heart. Those are the people that we will back. And this is a very controversial approach, but we are very much into the selection of the entrepreneur. Nowhere in that whole process do we look at business plan, ever. I've written a book called Lose the Business Plan. It is the worst way to determine whether to invest in an entrepreneur or not. You look at character of the entrepreneur, that blue heart, that ability to stand up again and again. I can go on. Let me stop now.
Okay, thank you. That is an interesting perspective there on the selection of potential entrepreneurs. Well, thank you. Herman, I see your hand up, and Ansi, I see you now also. So after Herman, I will come to you to make an input. Herman, please ask your question.
It's more a statement on observation, if you like, Mark.
Yes, please go ahead.
The one thing I found missing today is the potential role in incubation and growing agripreneurs existing agripreneurs can play and should play. It's a space which I believe is not being exploited enough. And the other thing I briefly wanted to reflect on was the difficulty in getting the produce to the end consumer. South Africa is a bad example in the sense that we have got some very few but very powerful players who are responsible for distributing agricultural products to the consumer. And in my personal opinion, what we should look at from a consumer point of view, forming consumer cooperations in townships, etc., in order to enable the farmers to supply virtually directly to the consumers. But it's a subject all on its own. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks for that input. I think it is very, very relevant there, and that is noted. Ansi, please, I hope that the connection is better now, and we will be happy to hear briefly from you how you work on the issue of pilot processing facilities that can support young people to get into agri-processing and give them opportunities for, say, product development and so on. And maybe you can take a forward-looking perspective also and touch briefly on what we can do going forward to promote or support having more pilot processing facilities in the region, please. It looks like we still cannot hear you. Okay. Right. Unfortunately, we cannot hear Ansi. The connection problems seem to be persisting. So, do we have any further contribution or comments? I don't see any hand at this point. Yes.
Very much. My name is Clement Ajololo, and I am not representing my organization on this particular platform, but allow me to just make one comment. It's with regard to one of the presenters mentioned the role of the state in being part of the solution to solving some of the entrepreneur or the business transaction. The example of Cote d'Ivoire in putting in place policy that tax unfinished products vis-a-vis exporting. I think that is a very important point to reflect on, to say to what extent are we as the ecosystem of all that we're talking about able to facilitate that the role players, both the state and the private sector and all involved, that cooperation and to really work together to provide the environment that is mutually beneficial. Because when the state puts such a policy in place, it's an incentive for the investor. But then there has to be that link and common understanding that is in the best interest of all. And I want to just register that as part of the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clement, for highlighting the important role that countries, the states or the public sector can play. And you have sort of highlighted the point that was made earlier about Cote d'Ivoire using some fiscal policies to try to discourage the export of raw materials and encourage value addition in country. Yeah, thank you very much. So I think that feeds into the bigger question of identifying the roles of different stakeholders, public, private, development partners, other service providers in playing different roles to facilitate incubation in the sub-region. Okay, thank you very much. So I think we have actually gone 20 minutes over our planned time. So it is probably a good time to sort of wrap up the discussion. We have touched on key issues. The words that have come, the terminology, we have heard about incubation, we've heard about acceleration, we've heard about prosperators, and when it comes to agriculture, we also hear of agripreneurs who may have also some specific needs, which will probably be a bit different from the general entrepreneurs. So the key issues have come. It is clear that a number of interventions need to come from different stakeholders. I mean, Clement just highlighted the point that was earlier made about the state's role. So the state has a role in using different tools. In the specific case of Cote d'Ivoire, we heard about using tax policy to discourage export of raw materials, and that in itself will help to encourage local processing. So then it brings the issue of how incubation can be used to promote local processing. Some of the key issues which need to be addressed in that context were raised in the discussion, and I'm not gonna go over that again. In terms of the impact of COVID, I think we have heard some key issues. The need, it has highlighted the need we have learned of sourcing materials, raw materials locally, and the measures that need to be put in place to ensure that that actually happens. And then in terms of going forward, I think going forward, it has also come up that it's important to support the supporters. So I think I will link that to Herman's point where he mentioned the role of existing agripreneurs, the role that existing agripreneurs can play to promote incubation going forward. So those are some few highlights that I have picked. Obviously, there was much more in the discussion. So I would like to thank you all very much for the contributions you have made, your comments and questions. I've seen a lot of comments in the chat, and these will also be taken on board. At this point, I would like to introduce Alison Keynes, who is the lead on partnership and private sector from FAO, and she will talk briefly about the UN Food Systems Summit, which is taking place next year, 2021. And there's obviously a link between what we are discussing, incubation and agribusiness, and the UN Food Systems Summit. So let me give the floor to Alison, please.
Thank you very much, Mark. And it's great to have the opportunity to speak to you and also to listen over the last sort of hour or so to the discussion. And it's a really important one because you know, the role of SMEs in the food system and the opportunity for SMEs in the food system, I think, are really vast. And I know that Agnes Kalabata, who is the special envoy for the Food Systems Summit, is very clear that she really wants to ensure that the voice of SMEs is in this summit. as well. And that's part of my role, a number of other colleagues, and therefore it's great to be able to listen to this discussion, as I've said. So I'm actually in the Secretariat team, so I lead on partnerships for the UN Food Systems Summit. And really what I'd like to be able to do just now is to give you a bit of an overview of the summit itself and where we are, and then think about how we can engage more with you from an SME perspective and get your voice in that summit, but also how we can make it concrete and practical and helpful for you as well. So I'll just take a few minutes. So firstly, in terms of the summit, I mean, this is a different summit. It's not part of a convention like climate. It is a UN General Secretary summit. So we're trying to do things a bit more different and have a much more sort of multi-stakeholder engagement and participation in the summit in a number of different ways. There are about 5 different objectives for the summit. One is ensuring access to safe and nutritious food for all. The second is shifting to more sustainable consumption patterns. And thirdly, boosting nature positive production at scale. Also advancing equitable livelihoods and value distribution. And finally, building resilience to vulnerability, shocks and stresses. And it was interesting to hear the discussion on COVID from your perspective. Those are the five objectives. Now, the overall outcomes that we're looking for is to really dramatically increase the public discourse on food systems. Because we feel that it needs to be much higher up on the political agenda. And I think in a way with COVID-19, whilst it's been a health crisis, there's also a food crisis, a food challenge here. So we have a really fantastic opportunity to use this summit and the summit process to really elevate the discourse on food systems. We also want to encourage and help curate the development of action and commitments towards the summit as well from multi-stakeholders. I mean, what's different about this summit is it's a systems summit. So it's not going to be just focused on climate. It's not going to be just focused on nutrition. It's about systems, and it's about all the actors and the stakeholders within that system working together. There will be a set of high-level principles, but it's not just about the high-level principles alone that are going to be endorsed, say, by heads of state. This is a heads of state summit. It's actually a set of principles that we want all stakeholders to endorse. There will also be a series of, sort of a accountability framework and a system of review, which is clearly quite critical. People need to be held to account in terms of what those commitments are. So that sort of provides a bit of a framework. The summit itself will take place at the end of next year. So we have just over a year to really use this process. And as I said at the beginning, we're very keen, and Agnes is specifically keen and challenged me a number of times, say, how are we going to reach the SME community because of the role that you play and the opportunity we have to look at how you address some of the challenges that you have and how we can unlock those challenges. One of my tasks is to reach out to the private sector in all its diversity, as well as other constituencies, to identify, what are the initiatives that should be showcased, that should be highlighted to others as a sort of beacon, as a sort of, this is the direction to go in if we want to have a more sustainable, more nutritious, more equitable food system. So what are those initiatives? The other element is, well, how do we leverage this process to the blocks, the finance blocks, the other blocks that you are experiencing that have are systemic in nature, how do we, one, identify those? How do we ensure then we can leverage the Food System Summit to start to unlock those challenges and get other stakeholders crowded in to help address them? And those are key elements that we're actively looking at. One of the specific ways, which is just starting, is we've got a series of 5 action tracks, which are effectively along those objectives I talked about. Within those action tracks, we want to crowd in, the sort of multi-stakeholders representative of the food system in various ways to do exactly that, to identify the priority areas to focus, to identify the blocks, to identify what's already working and needs to be amplified and accelerated. So that work is just really starting. We've just announced the leadership of those action tracks and the chairs and the sort of vice chairs and the anchor UN agencies. And we will be very shortly opening up those tracks in terms of getting that the membership for those tracks, and there'll be multiple ways to do that. The other area for engagement as well, and I could see a really important role for you as a community on the ground, is that we will be holding nation state food system summit dialogues in country. There'll be 3 of them. They'll be led by the national government, and we'd be really keen to look at ways how the SME community can be engaged in those as well, because whilst this is, a global summit, actually it's, not about driving sort of top-down recommendations. It is a global summit, but it's also a national summit as well. There's going to be there's going to be a linkage between what's being discussed globally, what's being discussed in country as well, so that we get that sort of linkage, which quite often can be missed in some of these global conversations. That is what we don't want that to happen with this summit. So we want to make sure that what's happening on the ground is relevant to the discussions globally and vice versa. Really sort of sense checking those. I'm very conscious I don't want to go on too much longer, but I'd love to have any of your questions if we've got time for that. So I will finish there and just hand over to, I don't know, you, Mark, or back to Anne. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Alison from the Food System Secretariat, and who is the lead on partnerships and the private sector. Thank you for sharing that information with us. Anne, do you want to add anything on that?
Oh, I think in the interest of time, we've gone half an hour over. I think we need to conclude, Mark, but it's been a very, very fruitful session. Thank you all for your comments. The questions we didn't manage to get to, we will answer them in the next days. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And again, let me thank all of you for your patience also, for staying with us up to this point, and for all the contributions. The comments that you have made in the chat are all noted. I also want to inform you that the recording of this discussion will be made available subsequently. So with that, I would like to bring the discussions to a close. We are supposed to have concluding remarks. Do we have the person to give us the concluding remarks? Okay. It appears we don't. So let me just again thank you for participating. Thank you for your comments, and have a good afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, all the participants.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark. Have a good afternoon.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.